And this, if my LinkedIn colleagues are anything to go by, this is pretty much the international picture. There's plenty of enthusiasm and support for mediation. Training to be a mediator is really popular. You won't find any problem recruiting mediators to get a certificate in mediation. They are all too often really disappointed at the end of the course. They're really enthusiastic, they're ready to go, and they are unable to use their skills because that simply aren't the parties coming to mediation. People are increasingly disappointed and frustrated at the fact that you cannot make a living as a mediator in the UK. You can make a living as a mediation trainer, but you're simply exacerbating the problem. There are more than 100 mediators per case in the UK, many of whom are willing to work for free. So employers often set up a mediation service because there's enthusiasm of one person, and when that person leaves, the service collapses. There isn't buy-in across the organisation. So workplaces, mediation is often positioned far too narrowly. Typically, you'll get a group of HR or ER staff that are trained, but HR are often not seen as impartial. They're often seen as a management tool. It still positions mediation as a technical speciality, and the expertise to manage and resolve conflict is inaccessible to the people who need it. There's a lack of cultural fit and often little visible support from senior management, and this means that engaging in mediation is just another HR initiative. It gets started, but it doesn't get sustained. In the longer term, staff turnover and loss of use means that many mediation services atrophy. So there's a lack of joined-up thinking about dispute resolution. Different departments react differently to conflict. Disputes are often managed very differently within a large organisation, depending on which department you're in. Most individuals only ever use mediation once, and we don't really pay a lot of attention to information that doesn't seem to talk to us and apply to us. So when we do get into a turmoil, we'll find prominence is given to formal processes that tend to focus on the rights of complainants and the right to pursue a grievance, the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Formal processes really appeal to people when they're hurt and angry. Many organisations haven't got the language right for getting the benefits of mediation across, and there isn't a profile for mediation to counteract that inevitable misinformation and misunderstanding that results in this consistent pattern of underuse and scepticism. So I'm wondering whether mediation is something that you've considered but haven't used. So we're going to do a poll on what puts you off using mediation. The government's view is that it's too expensive and people don't know how to access it. And I know many of you replied to this on the original joining questionnaire when you signed up for the webinar. So the government considers that HR doesn't use mediation because it's seen as a cost or because they're not adequately aware of its benefits. What's put you off? Perhaps you've used it once but not again, because it didn't seem to have a positive result. Perhaps getting funding is difficult. There's a lack of a central budget for dispute resolution, so finding someone with the money to pay for a mediation and sign off on it can be really challenging, especially if there's no guaranteed outcome. You may not know where to go to find a good mediator. You don't know how to access it. You may not know what's involved in getting a case to mediation. Perhaps you're unsure what information mediators need, or what's involved. So it becomes simply too difficult. And I think in a minute we're going to have the results of the poll. Okay.
Hi, Catherine. They're going to be in very shortly. Just bear with us. Thank you.
That's no worries. Okay. It's going to be very interesting because I think, it costs too much. This is really evenly split. So a third of you think it costs too much. Now, just to let you know, outsourcing a mediation to a professional supplier is going to cost you around about £1,000 a day. It's a broad figure, and most mediations will take a day's work. These are generalisations, so about £1,000. If you do something in-house, set up an in-house service, it's going to cost you about, rough figure, £10,000 sterling, and your per use cost is somewhere around £200 or £300 if you count your staff time. So you compare that to the alternatives. Although now we know we can have free conciliation from ACAS, perhaps the cost of mediation is going to be ever more significant. Okay, there's still a quarter of people who don't know how to access it, and about half of you are not sure that you've got cases that are suitable. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. I'll ask some questions about that in a while. Okay, so I've identified, as promised in the literature, 6 top reasons why mediation has not achieved its potential, and it has real potential. People know that mediation works. There's poor follow-through. We did some research across our client base on our 20 years of working with organisations setting up mediation services. We found that of the 200 organisations that we've trained, 56 of them had never actually set up a service. Also, a third of mediators hadn't mediated within 12 months of their original training. I touched on some of the reasons earlier, and one that stood out was that the linchpin, the key owner of the service, had left and wasn't replaced, or their replacement had a very different agenda. And I'll look at some of the other things you need to do to make sure your mediation service is effective just in a little while. The main reason I believe that mediation isn't popular is that it's not popular with people in disputes. What you identified in your poll is that the HR colleagues, which you are representative, consider there are reasons to put you off sourcing mediation. That's the first hurdle to get over. The second hurdle is getting the parties to agree. Parties are really reluctant to mediate. Now, I would bet my firstborn child, who I do love dearly, that less than 1% of us here today will ever have been on the other side of the mediation table. Many of you are mediators. Many of you are HR directors, HR managers, HR BPs. Have you ever been mediated? I would suspect not. When people hear about mediation, it puts them off taking part. The language we use, the way we talk about it, is actually not what they want to hear. When I'm in a conflict, I feel hurt and unfairly attacked, or I feel victimized. To be asked to talk openly and honestly with him, you must be joking. What I want is someone in authority to tell the other person they're wrong. People want to vindicate themselves and to have everything that we've said and done to be justified by an external person. We want emotional support, and we usually want the other person publicly punished. The last thing we want to hear from someone claiming to be offering us help is, I can't give you advice, I can't give you personal support, I can't give you an opinion or tell the other person that they're wrong. Mediators have to look at the model of mediation and make it more appealing to the parties themselves. Okay, people do line up to get trained as a mediator, and then they magically disappear. People really connect with being a mediator, and it's a great CV enhancement. But people leave their employer. It seems a perfect post-retirement option. A survey in 2010 showed that some 25% of in-house mediators had left their employer within a year of their training. And when someone's doing a mediation, they have to put aside their normal work. So there's often tensions between doing their day job and doing their voluntary role as a mediator, and it can simply become easier to say no. Mediation is often referred to as a tool to nip conflict in the bud. But early on, people think mediation is too big and laborious for a modest conflict. If Bill and Betty aren't getting on, well, surely they'll sort it out themselves, or it'll go away naturally. If they don't have the skills to do that, then the problem between Bill and Betty just gets bigger, and by the time it's damaging performance and productivity, and HR start thinking about mediation, Bill is off with stress, Betty has alienated the entire team. So the window for getting in there and mediating is very narrow. Sometimes it's the opposite. So the moment Bill names what's going on as bullying, HR believes, quite wrongly, that mediation can't be used in those situations, and even though Bill and Betty are sick of fighting and psychologically ready to build bridges, mediation isn't offered to them. Most people don't understand when to suggest mediation, and they can't spot conflicts that would benefit from mediation. Or managers try to give it a go and their efforts backfire, they make things worse, people end up in front of a formal mediator and they say, no thanks, I've given it a go and it doesn't work. The kind of triage that's offered by HR to identify when to use mediation more often excludes cases than includes them. And issues of money, status and time are often being used to filter cases out. Sometimes only the most desperate situations end up in mediation, with the result that the success rate is commensurately impacted downwards. 47% of potential cases don't ever reach the mediation table. People still have lots and lots of misunderstandings about mediation. They think it's about compromise, pushing things under the carpet, or they understand what it is, but it doesn't offer them anything. So we're going to watch our first case study video. It's a couple of minutes long, and it's from BIS, the Department for Business Innovation and Skills, which in the UK is the government department that's responsible for dispute resolution in the workplace. We were fortunate enough to be selected to train their mediators, and this is what they have to say.
The Department for Business leads on the government policy and strategy for dealing with workplace disputes. And at the time our policy colleagues were evaluating the current system in place and were finding it was not meeting the needs of the business. We went through a rigorous recruitment process to find a supplier who would meet our particular requirements for the department, and at the end of that full tender process we selected CMP Resolutions to provide that in-house advice and consultancy for us. We set up some in-house workshops, seminars for people to come along so they could find out what it would be like to be a mediator in BIS, and we selected 8 people to become BIS mediators. Those 8 people then went through a very thorough training programme, and they have now come out the other end and are fully qualified and have a professional qualification at the end of it. The impact of having an in-house mediation team has been quite real for us. It's allowed us to cut time down in terms of grievances. Line managers find it a lot easier to handle when they know they've got somebody helping them out to resolve an issue where it's actually gone beyond their capability. It's also allowed us to cut costs. The cost of the department, if we brought in external mediators for the 7 mediations that we've completed in our first year, would have been around about £10,000. So that's quite a significant cost in itself. It also has meant that we've been able to get mediations set up and resolved and issues dealt with quite quickly. And in terms of grievances in the department, they are slowly reducing.